The movie opens with a young girl riding around on her bike. She seems to be in quite a rush. As soon as she parks her bike, she runs to the nearby softball court with a camera clutched tightly in her hands. It appears as though the girl, whose name is Anne, is a yearbook editor. Excited, Anne starts to click multiple pictures of the event happening before her. Right at that moment, the team's star player, Sasha, starts running around the field. When Anne witnesses this, she immediately grabs her camera and starts clicking multiple photos of Sasha. It's evident that she has a massive crush on the player. The scene now shifts to Clifton, a young boy, rummaging around in his fridge. Just then, he hears his grandmother wail in pain. Panicking, Clifton immediately runs up to his abuela's room and sees that she has fallen down. He picks her up and helps her sit down on the bed. Clifton is then about to leave, but his grandma begs him to just stay with her for a while. The two proceeded to share a heartfelt conversation. Just as Clifton is about to leave, he gets a text from Anna saying she's coming over. Clifton is confused by the message but stays calm. He decides to skip school and simply waits for Anne to show up. The latter arrives moments later, showing off her new bike. Impressed by the cool bike, Clifton starts riding it and compliments Anne. The two are best friends and spend almost all of their time together. After having some fun with the bike, Anne and Clifton go to a nearby store and steal a bottle of wine. The two then return to Clifton's house in order to enjoy their beverage. However, much to their dismay, they can't find any corkscrews. Determined to crack open the bottle, Clifton starts messing around with it. He tries to use a saw on it, and when that doesn't work, he gets a massive katana to break the bottle. Thankfully, he becomes successful, and soon the two get extremely wasted. They walk around the city barely conscious and ride around on Anne's new bike. Later, they go back to Clifton's house and start chatting. At that moment, Clifton asks Anne if there's something she wants to tell him. That's when the latter confesses to Clifton that she has a crush on someone. Clifton, who's in love with Anne, is simply devastated when he hears this. Nonetheless, he tries to maintain his composure and asks his friend who her crush is. Awkward and anxious, Anne finally tells Clifton that she really likes Sasha. She timidly tries to confide in her best friend that she has fallen for a girl. However, the teenager just can't seem to blurt it out. The scene then changes to Anne, who appears to be circling around Sasha's address. She quickly musters up all the courage she has and tries to go to her crush's house. However, just as she's about to leave, she gets stopped by her mother. Anne tries her hardest to convince her mom that she's just going to finish a school project. Sadly, the latter doesn't believe her, so she offers to drive Anne to her friend's house for the project. Desperate to leave her house, Anne makes up multiple excuses. However, after failing miserably for quite some time, she just continues arguing with her mother. Eventually, Anne manages to evade her mother and run out of the house. Meanwhile, Sasha seems to be focusing on her class. As soon as school's over, she runs back to her house and takes a shower. There, she glances at herself in the mirror and feels insecure about her belly. She tries to suck in her belly and get an hourglass body, making herself uncomfortable in the process. Right then, Anne, who is now more excited than ever, runs up to Sasha's house and knocks on the door. It turns out that the two are working on a project. Sasha greets Anne, and soon the two begin to roam around the house while talking about their respective lives. Once they're settled down, Sasha explains to Anne that she has a really busy life as she has to juggle both her studies and athletics at the same time. Hearing this, Anne starts praising Sasha and all that she does while trying her hardest not to sound like a creep. Soon after, Anne starts asking Sasha a couple of questions about her lifestyle. This is because she wants to publish an interview with the pro softball player in this year's yearbook. While doing so, Anne sneakily asks Sasha if she has a boyfriend under the pretense of a standard interview question. Sasha quickly replies that she doesn't have one, which makes Anne sigh in relief. She then goes on to ask her crush why she isn't dating anyone. However, while answering, Sasha gets really uncomfortable. Anne notices this and instantly changes the topic. As time passes, the two get engrossed in their conversation and spend the evening together. Eventually, it gets really dark, so they bid each other goodbye. Before leaving, Anne shakes Sasha's hand and slightly kisses her cheek while informing her that it's a European way of saying goodbye. Sasha smiles at that and kisses Anne's cheek as well. This instantly causes Anne to fall for Sasha even more than before. She quickly leaves and waves at Sasha one last time before disappearing into the night. The next day, Sasha looks out the window of her seat and thinks about Anne. She even texts her but sadly doesn't get a response back. Just as she's about to lose hope, Anne texts back, and the two start chatting. They quickly become immersed in their humorous conversation. Eventually, Sasha stops thinking about her upcoming match. She just continues talking to Anne, switching from one topic to another. She doesn't even pay attention to her coach and simply hides in the back seat, still chatting with Anne. It seems as though she's very lonely and just wants a friend with whom she can share all her feelings. After talking for quite a while, Sasha bids Anne goodbye as her long-awaited match is finally about to start. The game goes really well initially. However, when Sasha enters the field, she can't seem to perform well. She's really nervous and ends up missing all the balls being thrown in her direction. Despite this, she tries her hardest to beat the other team. At that moment, the coach advises her to not swing so fast. Sasha agrees to the suggestion and slowly prepares herself for the next round. Finally, she hits the ball with all her might. The scene now shifts to the moment when Anne tries to confess to Clifton about her crush. Clifton initially assumes that Sasha is a guy who plays baseball at their school. However, when Anne tells him that Sasha actually plays softball, Clifton just laughs in her face. He starts mocking Anne by saying that she doesn't even know the basic rules of certain games and talks about how only girls play softball. The latter becomes really fidgety when she hears this. Clifton quickly notices Anne's uneasiness and tries to calm her down. He then asks her to tell him more about the guy that she likes, not realizing that Anne's crush is in fact a girl. Moments later, Anne begins to tell her best friend more and more about Sasha. However, tensions start rising between the two when Clifton asks Anne if she and Sasha have already made love. In turn, Anne asserts that she's still a She confesses to Clifton that all she's done with Sasha is talk. At that moment, the latter quickly gets up and starts pacing around his room, clearly distressed. Anne instantly notices Clifton's changed behavior and asks him if he's okay. That's when he tells her that he's really uncomfortable and doesn't want to listen to her anymore. Anne becomes really confused by this and asks him to just stay calm so that she can finish her story. However, Clifton doesn't let her do so. Instead, he starts to get really anxious and tries to confess to Anne about his feelings for her. Shortly after, Clifton gets closer to Anne and asks her to just stay still. Now more confused than ever, Anne stays motionless and doesn't respond back. However, much to her dismay, Clifton ends up kissing her. Anne is stunned and doesn't know how to react. She swiftly pulls away and just stares at the person she used to consider her best friend. The scene changes back to the present, where Anne appears to be watching a movie with her mother. Just then, she gets a call from Sasha and immediately runs out to pick up the call. However, when she does so, all she hears is Sasha crying. Needless to say, Anne is extremely worried and asks Sasha what happened. That's when the latter reveals that her team lost the match because of her. She goes on to tell Anne that she wasn't paying enough attention, which ultimately caused them to lose. Sasha appeared to be inconsolable, which made Anne feel really bad. She tries to comfort Sasha by saying that it's just one match and that she can always do better. Eventually, Anne tells Sasha about how she's always wanted to impress her. This distracts Sasha, and soon she starts to calm down. After that, Anne cracks a couple jokes, which makes Sasha giggle. The two then continue to talk in a French accent and laugh for a long time. Later that night, Sasha wakes up to a text from Anna. Excited, she responds back, and the two continue to talk once again. While chatting, Sasha complains to Anne that she can't seem to fall asleep. That's when the latter sends her a song and asks her to listen to it. Sasha does as told and continues to text Anne. Midway through the song, Anne suggests that Sasha pleasure herself in order to fall asleep faster. Nervous and excited, Sasha decides to try it for herself. She starts touching herself while thinking of Anne. On the other hand, Anne does the same. The next day, while Anne is walking to school, she sees that her bike is missing. She hurriedly runs up to the broken lock and inspects it carefully. The scene now changes to a flashback where Anne appears to be securing her bike to a pole. Right then, Clifton walks up to her and laughs. Furious, Anne walks away and yells at him to stay away from her. However, Clifton doesn't listen and continues to follow her. He asks her what's wrong, to which Anne responds that she hates when he calls her. However, even after hearing this, Clifton proceeds to tease Anne for being gay, which really infuriates her. The two then get into a massive argument. When Anne remembers this specific moment, she instantly realizes that Clifton has stolen her bike. She stares at her broken lock and walks away, unsure of what she should do now. Later that day, Anne sits at the school library, editing the yearbook. She reads all the messages for Sasha and corrects any grammatical mistakes present. That's when Clifton walks up to her and tries to declare a truce. However, this doesn't last long as Clifton laughs and calls her a disgusting. Unable to control her anger anymore, Anne walks up to the librarian and complains about Clifton. Meanwhile, Clifton takes this opportunity to learn all about Sasha. A while later, the librarian yells at Clifton, asking him to leave Anne alone. However, this doesn't stop him at all, so the latter just sits in a different spot. Anne continues with her work, but Clifton doesn't stop pestering her. He asks her to apologize to him, which further angers her. Right at that moment, Anne notices the bolt cutter in front of her. She instantly realizes what Clifton has done. Enraged, she beats him up with all her might. This ultimately results in an intervention. Her mother is called to school and informed about the violent act. When Anne's mother learns about the incident, she apologizes profusely to the principal. Eventually, Clifton is sent to the nurse, while Anne receives a 3-day suspension. Later that day, while Clifton is walking out of the nurse's office, he runs into Sasha. He immediately starts talking to her and tries to impress her. Meanwhile, Anne's mother asks her if something is up, but the latter just refuses to answer. Instead, she just lashes out at her mother. She calls her mom an insult, which ultimately ends with her getting slapped in the face. After realizing what she had just done, Anne's mother tries to apologize to her, but the angry teenager just runs away. She eventually hides out on the school's terrace while her mom sadly walks away. Finally alone, Anne texts Sasha, asking if she could hang out. On the other hand, Clifton and Sasha continue talking. When the latter finally introduces herself, Clifton realizes that she's actually Anne's crush. He then takes this opportunity to compliment Sasha and tries to steal her from Anne. Later that day, Anne and Sasha meet up at a nearby thrift store and check out all the items there. While browsing through some clothes, Anne asks Sasha if she could stay at her place for the night. The latter readily agrees to the request, which really relieves Anne. Shortly after, Sasha excitedly tells Anne that Clifton has asked her out. When Anne hears this, she's utterly devastated. But despite this, she tries to maintain her composure and asks Sasha more about Clifton. However, Sasha quickly notices Anne's uneasiness and asks her if she has a crush on Clifton instead. The scene now changes to Clifton, who is walking down the corridor. Just as he's about to leave school, the counselor summons him. Clifton is clearly annoyed by this, but follows the teacher nonetheless. Soon after, the counselor asks him what he had done for Anne to react the way she did. Clifton tries to defend himself, but the counselor just doesn't listen. Eventually, the young boy confesses that Anne will never forgive him for how he has treated her. He adds that the thought of Anne hating him is really bothersome. That's when the counselor comforts Clifton by saying that he should just say sorry and try to redeem himself. Hearing this, the latter starts to get really anxious and fidgety. Unable to hide it anymore, he begs the counselor not to utter a word of this to anyone. The counselor readily agrees to this, and that's when Clifton finally admits what had happened the day Anne had initially told him about Sasha. The scene now changes to Anne and Clifton talking in her room. Anxious, he asks her if she really likes the guy. When Anne doesn't respond, he kisses her. Anne initially pushes him away, but this just causes Clifton to kiss her even harder. But eventually she gives in. Clifton then initiates intimacy, even though Anne is... Finally, she pushes him away and starts crying. However, Clifton just acts confused and gets annoyed at Anne for stopping halfway through. He then confesses that he really likes her. Right at that moment, Anne tearfully expresses that her current crush is not a boy, as Clifton had assumed, but a girl. When Clifton hears this, he starts crying and gets really agitated. Instead of supporting his best friend, he accuses her of leading him on. He even goes as far as to call her a talks about how he wasted his time on her. Clearly devastated, Anne walks out while Clifton continues to insult her. The scene changes back to the counselor's room, where Clifton divulges his unforgivable act to his teacher. After hearing Clifton's confession, the counselor asks if he had slept with Anne. This simple question makes Clifton realize what he has actually done. Back at Sasha's house, the two girls pretend to fall asleep and then quietly sneak out of the house. They enter a bar, drink alcohol, and flirt with some men. Soon after, Anne and Sasha start dancing together. They get closer and enjoy each other's company. Eventually, they end up kissing passionately. After the kiss, Sasha becomes really confused and awkward. She runs to the bathroom while Anne follows her. Later that night, Anne returns home with Sasha. Tensions rise between the two, so they just go to bed without talking. After a while, Sasha asks Anne not to tell anyone about their kiss. The latter agrees to the request and notices how fidgety Sasha is. In order to get rid of the tension, Anne comforts Sasha and talks to her. Shortly after, Sasha asks Anne to join her in bed. Anne agrees, and the two end up getting intimate. The next morning, Sasha gets ready for school and asks Anne to do the same. Just then, Anne gets a text from the guy she had previously met at the bar. Curious, she opens the message only to see a picture of her and Sasha kissing. Needless to say, Anne is stunned but brushes it off. She doesn't tell Sasha anything about it and simply walks to school. While going to school, Sasha keeps quiet and doesn't talk to Anne at all. Instead, she starts to completely ignore Anne, which really confuses the latter. The scene now shifts to Clifton, who appears to be getting ready for school. Just as he's about to leave, he gets a text from Anne asking if he really asked Sasha out. Anne then sends another message, warning him to stay away from her. Burdened with guilt, Clifton readily agrees. However, right then, he gets another text from Sasha, asking him out on a date. Later that day, Clifton and Sasha go out on a date, where the latter confesses that she wants them to be a thing. However, this just makes Clifton all the more confused. He simply assumes that Sasha wants him to be her fake boyfriend because she's afraid to come out. Thinking that he could make things right, he offers to become Sasha's beard. That's when things take a wrong turn for Sasha. She immediately realizes that Clifton thinks of her as Anne's girlfriend. The following day, Anne sees Sasha hanging out with her friends. Mustering up all the courage she has, she walks up to Sasha and asks if they could talk privately. The latter agrees to the request but maintains her distance. Seeing this, Anne asks Sasha if everything is okay between the two. However, Sasha doesn't say anything and just walks away. Now incredibly desperate, Anne runs after Sasha and publicly confesses her feelings towards the latter. This ultimately makes Sasha extremely uncomfortable, and so she awkwardly exclaims that she's not gay. She then hurriedly walks away. Shortly after, Anne walks over to a bench and regrets causing such a scene. She doesn't know what to do anymore. During the last yearbook meeting, Clifton glances over at Anne as she browses through pictures of Sasha. He stares at her for a while before handing over the final copy of the yearbook to his teacher. The teacher momentarily waves the flag in front of his students, celebrating their hard work. He then hands it back to Clifton. Just then, Anne walks over to Clifton and asks him for the drive. The latter initially hesitates, but Anne just snatches it away from his hand. A couple days later, the yearbooks are published and distributed around the whole school. However, unbeknownst to everyone, Anne had secretly included the picture of her and Sasha kissing in the yearbook. Because of this, the photo is printed in every yearbook, and ultimately, the families of Clifton, Anne, and Sasha are called by the school to convene. When Anne's mother finally reaches the school, she sees Sasha and Anne sitting quietly in front of the principal. She inquires more about the matter, and that's when the principal tells everyone present that Clifton had placed the photo of Anne and Sasha in the yearbook. It turned out that Clifton, still struggling with his guilt over coercing Anne, had taken the blame for placing the intimate picture in the yearbook. While discussing solutions, Sasha's mother asks the teachers and the guidance counselor to fix their mistake. Since that wouldn't be possible, the teachers simply decided to kick Clifton off the yearbook team for next year. However, this doesn't satisfy Sasha's mother. She wishes for the yearbook to be changed while complaining that her daughter's privacy has been breached. When Anne's mother finally sees the picture, she's shocked. She tries to apologize on behalf of her daughter. Meanwhile, the principal tries to defuse the situation by saying that they have no problem with Sasha and Anne dating. She further goes on to explain that intimate pictures and PDA aren't supposed to be published in the yearbook. At that moment, Clifton chimes in and asserts that there are multiple pictures of straight couples kissing. He then accuses the teachers of being Right at that moment, Sasha's mother threatens the principal by saying that if all the yearbooks aren't returned, she will get the police involved. While all this is happening, Sasha and Anne quietly sit and observe everything that's going on. Shortly after, Sasha speaks up and tells everyone that she never wanted to kiss Anne. She goes on to assert that the encounter in the photograph was completely non-consensual and depicted Anne taking advantage of her while she was drunk. Hearing this, Anne protests and says that she never forced herself on Sasha. That's when the latter claims that she told Anne to stop but that her pleas were left unheard. Anne tries her hardest to defend herself, but nobody believes her. Eventually, Anne's mother speaks up and asks Sasha if she's being forced to say all this. When the timid girl doesn't say anything, her mother becomes furious and accuses Anne of forcefully kissing Sasha. Moreover, she exclaims that her daughter isn't gay. Just then, Clifton speaks up and says that the entire student body knew about Sasha and Anne's dating. He affirms that everyone knew about the two girls hooking up. Moments later, he asks Sasha to tell the truth, but the latter just refuses to do so. Soon, the entire room erupts into a massive argument. When the situation finally calms down, the counselor asks Sasha if Anne had done anything to her that she didn't want. However, Sasha simply replies that she doesn't know if she had consented or not. After hearing this, Anne and her mother quickly get up and leave the meeting. While walking out, Sasha's mother insults them, but the two pay no heed to her. Later that day, Anne visits Jasmine, the owner of the bar where she and Sasha had previously hung out. It seems that she wants to test herself for HIV. As Jasmine starts the diagnosis, she tells Anne that there's nothing to be worried about. The two then share a period of reflection over her intimate history, during which Anne talks about her experience with Clifton. She then tells Jasmine about the time she was forced to give to a guy she had met in the bar. Shortly after, Jasmine tells Anne that her test results are negative. Needless to say, Anne is relieved. However, she ends up breaking down. Through tears, she discusses her heartache over Sasha and finally accepts that she is gay. Now relieved and happy, Anne proceeds to leave the store. Just then, she sees her bike in the shop window. The movie finally concludes with Anne getting her stolen bike back.